Welcome to the Spot On Insurance Podcast, brought to you by Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. This is Ted Tavares.
And this is Arlene Tavares coming to you from beautiful Puerto Rico. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at a topic that affects every single one of us.
But before we get started, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And now here's our host, Doug Foresta.
This is your host, Doug Foresta. With me today is Dante Disparte. The topic today is compliance and creativity, trade-offs and the or is what we'll talk about today. Is it a trade-off or does it not have to be a trade-off? Dante Disparte, say a little bit about him and bring him right on. He's the CEO of Risk Cooperative, an innovative strategy and risk advisory firm based in Washington, D.C. He serves on the board of the American Security Project, where he chairs the Business Council. He's a frequent speaker and commentator on business and political issues shaping the world. And you can learn more about his company at riskcooperative.com. That's riskcooperative.com. You'll find out some other ways that you can learn about him as well. Dante Disparte, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Doug. Thanks. I'm glad to be on.
Thank you. So, the first question that I have for you actually is, I said a little bit about you, but can you describe a little more about, what Risk Cooperative is and what you do?
Sure. So Risk Cooperative is a reasonably new risk and insurance advisory firm. We founded the company in 2014 to basically bring imagination to the business of risk and insurance. Innovative platform. We're licensed across all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, and we, from that platform, also trade in the global insurance markets. But we believe that this business is capable of being a catalyst for growth as opposed to just a cost of doing business and kind of just checking boxes.
Nice. Well, one of the things that I'm really excited about this topic of compliance and creativity. Now, let me start here because I know we're gonna talk about. I know we have 4 points to build on, but I guess the first question I would ask you is, insurance is a pretty heavily regulated industry, right? Does that mean that there's no room for innovation?
Well, I think there's, because it is heavily regulated. I always discuss in the foundation of our company and then in my career in this business that there are 4 forces that govern the way you operate in global finance, but in particular in the insurance business. One of them is compliance. The other is regulation. The third is ethics. And the fourth is imagination. And I think if you just had the last two, ethics and imagination, but you had no respect for compliance and regulation, you'd have a hard time taking an idea to market, and you'd ultimately be on the wrong side of the regulatory environment. So in my world, and how we've built a national company that is at the same time an innovator, I think it begins with having a healthy respect for those first two pillars of this industry, the compliance and regulatory pillar. That you have to respect those forces; they're there for a reason, and that from that base of that strong foundation, you could then leverage, your ethical approach to the business, and you could then leverage, of course, how to be imaginative and entrepreneurial while operating in an otherwise heavily regulated space.
So maybe we can dig into each of these points and see how that impacts, or how that would, impact someone who's listening to this and, is working in the insurance industry. So maybe you can, let's start with maybe the first two, the regulation and compliance. Why is that so important? You said that if you just have the 3 and 4, ethics and imagination, without regulation and compliance, that's a problem. Can you say a little bit more about the importance of the regulation and compliance piece?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, there's only so many professions in life that are true professions, right? That carry an individual liability, so that the words and the advice that we impart can come back to haunt you, not only as an enterprise, but also at the individual level. And it's a doctor, a lawyer, an insurance broker have a code of conduct and have certain expectations of their advice that conveys a legal liability, and that conveys sort of an individual responsibility beyond the firm. And that's a very unique property of the insurance business that, I think needs to be understood and respected by the enterprises in our space, by the regulators in our space, but more importantly, by the individuals who are entering this industry. And the foundation of that is anchored in, a long history of, the regulator ultimately having to step in where private enterprise failed, whether it was workers' rights, whether it is, responding to the global financial crisis, where ultimately the state has to pick up the pieces and cover the cost of underperformance or mismanagement and bad compliance standards. I think the regulations are there for a reason, and we too many of us in the industry often toe the line, merely use it to check boxes, as opposed to using that framework as a standing for building competitive advantage and for growing a company that can also be imaginative while compliant.
So yeah, I guess that would be the other side of it, right? So someone says, "Well, I get it. I need to." I need to do regulation. I need to do compliance. But like you said, I'm just checking off the boxes. Right. How does that then relate to, or how does that help me with for example, the ethics and imagination?
Well, because I think, there are a couple of recent examples. I was trying to avoid naming names, but there were a couple of recent examples of companies that became quite big particularly in healthcare in the United States that, maybe might have done the minimal requirement in terms of checking regulations, but the rest of the way they were growing the business was largely very entrepreneurial, technology driven, but without sort of a respect for how the business is to be conducted. And the first couple of speed bumps later, you start to really harm your opportunity to grow a company in this business if you really don't anchor it from the very beginning in a platform that is regulated and compliant. And unfortunately, a lot of business people think of those two things as almost bad words, and that what we need to do is the minimal requirement, and then from that point of view, we can continue growing. I think, in fact, regulation and compliance need to be treated like core common operating principles. And from that platform of strength and from that platform of compliance, you could then start to build out, again, a whole range of different solutions, channel strategies, and things like that.
So, it's really interesting. It's really interesting what you're saying, because I think that's usually the way it's framed, right? Are we going to focus on, you always hear people say, "Oh, we're over-regulated and it's killing innovation." But what you're saying is, what I hear you saying, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing you saying is that there really doesn't have to be a trade-off between compliance and creativity.
That's right. And I think you hit the nail on the head, which is in the same vein that there is a debate between privacy and security. I actually don't believe regulation and imagination are actually trade-offs. I think the two things need to be thought of as locked in an intertwined relationship. So instead of opposite ends of a spectrum, they're in co-movement. So, I can't create an imaginative new solution to help build responses to cyber risk if I don't also understand how that particular category of insurance needs to be traded across the United States, right? And so on the one front, I could come up with a very thoughtful new approach to insurance, but if I don't anchor it with how is that insurance supposed to be traded, then I might have created a great, short flash in the pan solution, but it will never reach scale and it will never reach its intended market audience and participation unless I've also understood how compliance and imagination need to work hand in hand. And so instead of looking at them as trade-offs or a cost of doing business and friction, you just simply, if you want to operate in this business, you have to have healthy respect for those first two pillars. And then the latter two just become so much easier, and it's so much more gratifying to be able to work in this space.
Can you say more about the ethics piece? I'm trying to wrap my mind around. I think people get regulation, they get compliance. What do you mean by ethics? That third pillar. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, to me, it's about being completely uncompromising about what, at least in my business, I call the broker Credo. This is a business that we provide an essential service. No one, even if you don't like the insurance business, no one complains when their house is being rebuilt following a fire or a flood. And no one complains in a company when you have the response of professionals following a cyber breach or a D&O claim. But this is a business of utmost good faith at the first order of business, right? So when I present an insurance policy to someone, it is a contract of utmost good faith, and all it says is, in the event of X, we will do Y. And so the people with whom you trade are your first and last line of defense in this type of industry, right? And so to insist that as companies and as operators and as business leaders in this space, we simply cannot compromise on our ethical standards. So in our company, we have what I call the broker Credo, the best match of coverage and price in our client's interest above all else. And it's against that standard that, one, I get to sleep at night as a CEO in this business, but two, we get to ensure that the people we recruit into our company are the very best of breed, and that what they're bringing to the table is a combination of aptitude and attitude that is our core strength. That's our competitive advantage.
Spot On Insurance is sponsored by ILSA, Insurance Licensing Services of America, America's premier licensing and regulatory compliance experts. To learn more about ILSA and the services they provide, visit ilsainc.com. And how about, obviously imagination, I know innovation obviously is very important to entrepreneurial companies. But I guess my question would be, when you think about imagination, I guess one of the things that I'll put this out there, how can I be imaginative, right? Is it possible to be imaginative, to maybe push the boundaries in a way, but not lose the regulation, compliance, and ethics?
Right. Well, let's think about a very extreme example, and in the metaphor, understand where imagination, ethics, compliance, and regulation fall. Right. So you simply cannot respond to Kennedy's vision that by the end of this decade we will put a man on the moon, unless you also understood the forces of gravity, the forces of physics, how to build a rocket, and how to power that rocket, not just through, the bold vision, but through all of that other chain. And that's my point, that the big value chain, the forces that govern this business matter, and each one needs the same exact amount of respect. In the same way that the words would have rung hollow to put a man on the moon at the end of a decade, had you not also had healthy respect for gravity, healthy respect for physics and engineering and rocketry and all the fun stuff that goes into achieving something genuinely ambitious. But I find that it's that last pillar, it's the lack of imagination, frankly, in our industry. And it's the fact that so much of the industry is heavily consolidated. So much of the industry is, and this is perhaps where regulation has gone too far. So much of our industry is afraid of their own shadow, and they're afraid of taking risks.
The way that I would sort of frame it, thinking about for the listener, is that if you know that you've nailed the regulation, compliance, and ethics, that it really frees you up to be imaginative within that. Like if you know that the rocket is not going to explode, I'm thinking about SpaceX, but if you know that the rocket's not going to explode, it frees you up. If you know your car is going to function, it frees you up. That's what I hear you saying. Like far from forcing you to not be imaginative, it actually, if you know that you nail the regulation and compliance, it frees you up to get to ethics and imagination. Would that be fair to say?
100%, absolutely 100%. And to the SpaceX metaphor or example, not metaphor, but recent news, it is an unfortunate issue, but there also has to be a real acceptance of failure for imagination to thrive. And I don't believe in entrepreneurship or in innovations being these radical white lab coat approaches. I believe that we need a much more systematic, iterative approach of trial and error. And that, in the process of building something new, eventually there will be unfortunate events like a SpaceX rocket blowing up. And in our business, as long as we can contain the downside consequences of that, then I think we need to, in the insurance industry more generally, incent and encourage a genuine sort of entrepreneurial culture. We need to borrow lessons from our friends in other industries that have created incubators and innovation hubs and clusters, because it's such an essential service that at the end of the day, insurance translates into resilience at a household level, a business level, and a societal level. And wherever we could spread it compliantly, ethically, and all the rest, I think it's broadly better for the planet. And one quick example of that, there was research done by Lloyd's that shows that for every 1% penetration in insurance in a particular economy, there is a 22% reduction on the taxpayer burden following events, following crises and risks and things like that. So insurance genuinely translates into resilience wherever it exists and wherever we could grow market share.
Thank you. And I know that at the beginning, I mentioned that people can go to riskcooperative.com and learn more about your company, what you do. But I know also you have a book. Do you want to share with people what that's about and how they can get it?
Sure. I'm happy to. Thank you for reminding me of that. So the book is titled Global Risk Agility and Decision Making. It's co-authored with one of my colleagues, Daniel Wagner, and it's available now, published by Macmillan, but available on Amazon and a wide range of platforms. And what we delve into in the book is this notion that we need to move well beyond risk management and achieve the standard of agility in the face of very complex and very interconnected risks, whether it's cyber risk, climate change, socio-political risk, and others. All of these things are coming home to roost, and that the old regime and the old way of managing risks, which was much more passive and all about aversion, needs to evolve, and we need to take on risk head on and confront it.
Thank you so much. And how about any other ways that people can reach you? Social media, any of that fun stuff?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'm at some level out there. I'm on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, and then our company website more generally is probably the best way to follow the work we're doing.
Dante Disparte, riskcooperative.com. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your words of wisdom.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Doug.
Thank you.
By the way, our show notes and bonus resources can be found on spotoninsurance.com. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.
Thanks for joining us. And don't forget, we'll be answering this week's podcast questions at Spot On Insurance Facebook Live, Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern.